In January 2007, a man in a black turtleneck walked onto a stage in San Francisco and pulled a phone out of his pocket. Within minutes, the entire technology industry became obsolete. No one in that room fully understood it yet, but the way humans would communicate, work, and live was about to change forever. This is the story of how Apple did not just build a phone. Apple rebuilt an entire industry from the ground up and destroyed the giants who thought they were untouchable. Before the iPhone, the smartphone world belonged to two kinds of companies. On one side was BlackBerry, the device favored by executives and politicians, famous for its physical keyboard and secure email. On the other side was Nokia, the largest phone maker on Earth, selling hundreds of millions of units a year across every country on the planet. These companies were not small, they were empires. Nokia alone controlled close to 40% of the global mobile phone market. Executives at both companies believed their position was permanent. Phones had keyboards, phones had styluses, phones were for calls and texts. That was simply how phones worked. Steve Jobs did not see it that way. Apple had already reshaped the music industry with the iPod and iTunes, but Jobs was worried about something else entirely. He believed that phone manufacturers were going to eventually put music players inside their phones, and if that happened, the iPod business would die. Instead of waiting for someone else to kill his product, Jobs decided Apple would build the thing that killed it first. The project was kept in near total secrecy inside Apple, known internally as Project Purple. Engineers worked behind locked doors, badge access was restricted, and even people within Apple did not know what was being built down the hall. Steve Jobs pulled some of his best engineers off other projects and told them almost nothing except that this would be the most important thing they ever worked on. The early development was brutal. Apple actually built two competing prototypes at the same time. One was based on shrinking down the iPod, using its click wheel to dial numbers. The other was based on a touchscreen, something almost no one in the industry believed was ready for a mainstream device. Touchscreens at the time were slow, inaccurate, and usually required a stylus. Jobs pushed the team toward the harder path. He wanted a device controlled entirely by a finger, with no stylus and no physical keyboard. The technical problems were enormous. The touchscreen kept scratching, the battery drained too fast, the software crashed constantly. At one point, engineers were putting the phone through hundreds of hours of testing just to get basic functions to behave. Jobs was known to walk into rooms, pick up a working prototype, and reject it on the spot for reasons no one else could see, then walk out and demand it be rebuilt. The pressure inside the team was intense, the hours were long, and the secrecy meant employees could not tell friends or family what they were even doing at work. Then came January 9, 2007. Steve Jobs stood on stage at the Macworld conference and told the audience that Apple was introducing three revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. Then he paused and said, "These are not three separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone." The reaction in the room was electric, but outside of it, many industry leaders were dismissive. The chief executive of Microsoft at the time laughed publicly at the idea that the iPhone would gain any significant market share, pointing to its high price and lack of a physical keyboard. Nokia's leadership largely viewed it as a niche product for wealthy tech enthusiasts, not a threat to their dominance in the broader market. This is one of the most important lessons in business history. The companies that got disrupted did not fail to see the iPhone. They saw it clearly. They simply did not believe it mattered. What made the iPhone dangerous was not just the touchscreen, it was the entire experience built around it. Apple had designed an operating system from scratch, optimized specifically for a phone, not adapted from a desktop system like some competitors were attempting. The interface was simple enough that people could use it without a manual. Pinch to zoom, swipe to scroll, tap to open. These gestures feel completely normal today, but at the time, they were an entirely new language for interacting with technology. The real turning point came a year later in 2008 with the launch of the App Store. Apple opened its platform to outside developers, allowing anyone to build and sell an app directly to iPhone users. This decision transformed the iPhone from a well-designed device into an entire ecosystem. Developers around the world began building tools, games, and services that Apple itself never could have created alone. The App Store gave people a reason to choose an iPhone that had nothing to do with the phone itself. It was about everything the phone could now do. Nokia's collapse did not happen overnight, but it accelerated quickly. The company was still shipping enormous volumes of phones, but its software, called Symbian, was becoming outdated and difficult for developers to build for. Nokia leadership debated internally for years about how seriously to respond to touchscreen competition, and internal reports later described a culture where bad news was often softened before it reached the top. By the time Nokia committed fully to a new strategy, partnering with Microsoft's Windows Phone platform in 2011, it was already years behind. In 2013, Nokia sold its mobile phone business to Microsoft, a stunning fall for a company that had once dominated the entire global market. BlackBerry followed a similar pattern. Its leadership believed that corporate customers would always prioritize security and the physical keyboard over a touchscreen. They underestimated how quickly consumer preferences would pull entire companies along with them, as employees increasingly wanted to use the same device for work and personal life. BlackBerry's market share collapsed over the following several years as the iPhone and soon after Android devices took over. Google saw the shift coming faster than most. At the time the iPhone was unveiled, Google had actually been developing Android as a BlackBerry-style device with a physical keyboard. Within weeks of watching the iPhone announcement, the Android team reportedly went back and redesigned their entire operating system around a touchscreen-first approach. This is a rare example of a company reacting to disruption in real time instead of years later. Google understood that the interface itself, not just the hardware, was the new battlefield. By making Android free for phone manufacturers to use, Google gave companies like Samsung, HTC, and later dozens of others a way to compete with Apple without building an operating system from scratch. Within a few years, the smartphone market had split into two dominant ecosystems, Apple's iOS and Google's Android, and nearly every other operating system, including BlackBerry's and Nokia's Symbian, was pushed to the margins and eventually abandoned. The financial numbers behind this shift are staggering. The iPhone went from a single product launched in 2007 to becoming the single most profitable product line in the history of consumer electronics, generating more revenue for Apple than most entire industries. It transformed Apple from a company known mainly for computers and music players into the most valuable company in the world for extended periods over the following decade. The App Store alone grew into an economy generating hundreds of billions of dollars in transactions for outside developers, creating entire careers in companies that did not exist before 2008. Apple did not win because it invented touchscreens or the idea of a smartphone. Apple won because it was willing to cannibalize its own success, taking the risk of hurting the iPod business before a competitor could do it for them. Apple won because it obsessed over the entire user experience instead of a single feature. And Apple won because it built a platform, not just a product, allowing an entire external economy of developers to grow around its device. The lessons from this story extend far beyond phones. The businesses that get disrupted are rarely blind to the disruption. They see it. They simply convince themselves it doesn't apply to them, that their customers are different, that their advantage is unshakable. The companies that win are usually willing to compete against their current product before someone else forces them to. If you're building something today, ask yourself an uncomfortable question. What is the version of your product that could make your current product obsolete? If you can imagine it clearly, someone else can too. The only real choice is whether you build it yourself or whether you wait and watch someone else take everything you built. Apple did not just release a phone in 2007. It released a decision to risk everything it had already built in order to build something bigger. That decision is the reason the device in your pocket right now looks the way it does.